The charcoal moved across the paper in swift, confident strokes, capturing the sharp line of his jaw, the way his hat shadowed his eyes, the lean strength in his shoulders as he leaned against the post outside the general store. Katherine Emerson had been watching the cowboy for 20 minutes now, her fingers working quickly to translate what her eyes saw into art, and she prayed he wouldn't move before she finished capturing the way the afternoon sun cut across his face. Jamestown, California, in the summer of 1878 was dusty and loud, full of miners and drifters and men looking to strike it rich in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Katherine had arrived 3 weeks ago with her aunt, seeking refuge after her father's death had left them with nothing but debts in Sacramento. Her aunt had a small boarding house here, and Katherine earned what little she could by selling sketches to travelers who wanted portraits to send back east. She sat now on a bench across the rutted Main Street, her drawing board propped on her knees, completely absorbed in her work. She was so focused that she didn't notice when the cowboy straightened, didn't see him tilt his head as if he'd felt her gaze. She was shading the collar of his shirt when a shadow fell across her paper. "That's mighty fine work, miss." Katherine's head snapped up, her heart lurching into her throat. The cowboy stood directly in front of her, and up close he was even more striking than from across the street. He had to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and when he smiled, a dimple creased his left cheek. "I'm sorry," Katherine stammered, heat flooding her face. "I didn't mean to be presumptuous. I should have asked permission. No need to apologize." He crouched down so he was at eye level with her, studying the portrait she'd been drawing. His expression softened with something like wonder. "Is that really how you see me?" Katherine looked down at her sketch, suddenly uncertain. She'd drawn him as she saw him, strong and solitary with a kind of quiet intensity in his expression. "I draw what I observe. May I?" He gestured to the bench beside her, and she nodded, moving her skirts to make room. He sat still gazing at the portrait. "I've never seen myself like that before. When I look in a mirror, I just see a dusty ranch hand, but this makes me look like something more." "You looked thoughtful," Katherine said quietly, "like you were far away, thinking about something important." He was silent for a moment, then turned to her with those amber eyes. "I was thinking about my mother. She passed 2 years ago. Today would have been her birthday." Katherine's throat tightened. "I'm sorry for your loss. I lost my father 4 months ago." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of shared grief. He extended his hand. "Miles Everett. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles north of town." She took his hand, feeling the rough calluses against her palm. "Katherine Emerson. I live at my aunt's boarding house on 3rd Street. The Emerson house. I know it. Your aunt makes the best apple pie in the county." He looked down at the portrait again. "Miss Emerson, I know this is bold of me, but would you consider selling me this drawing?" "I'd like to keep it if you're willing to part with it." Katherine blinked in surprise. Most of her customers wanted formal portraits, stiff poses in their Sunday best. "You want to keep a sketch of yourself?" "I want to keep this sketch drawn by you on this day." His voice was earnest. "It feels like something worth remembering. How much would you ask for it?" She should have named a price, should have been practical, but something made her say, "You can have it, as a gift." "I couldn't accept it for nothing. You have a rare talent, Miss Emerson. Then consider it an exchange. You've given me the gift of a willing subject who didn't mind being observed. That's rarer than you might think." Miles studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "How about this? Let me buy you dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening and we'll call it even." Katherine knew she should refuse. She'd been in Jamestown for less than a month, and her aunt had already warned her about being too friendly with the cowboys and miners who filled the town. But there was something in Miles Everett's eyes, something honest and kind that made her want to take the risk. "I'd like that," she said softly. His smile was like sunrise. 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock. He stood, carefully rolling the portrait and tucking it inside his vest. "Until tomorrow, Miss Emerson." She watched him walk away, his long stride carrying him down the dusty street toward the livery stable. When he was out of sight, she looked down at her empty drawing board and realized her hands were trembling. That night, Katherine lay in her small bedroom at the boarding house, listening to the sounds of Jamestown settling into darkness. Her aunt had 6 boarders at present, all miners, and their heavy footsteps creaked on the floorboards as they returned from the saloons and gambling halls. She should have been thinking about practical matters, about how to earn enough money to help her aunt with expenses, about whether she should write to her cousins in San Francisco to ask if they had work for her there. Instead, all she could think about was Miles Everett's smile, the way he'd looked at her portrait as if it were something precious. She'd been so focused on survival since her father's death that she'd forgotten what it felt like to anticipate something wonderful. Tomorrow evening felt like a promise, and she found herself imagining what they might talk about, whether his hand might brush hers across the table, whether she'd have the courage to sketch him again. When she finally slept, she dreamed of amber eyes and California sunshine. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Katherine helped her aunt with the morning chores, scrubbing floors and changing linens, preparing lunch for the boarders who worked the night shift at the mines. Her aunt, Emma Whitfield, was a practical woman in her 50s who'd been widowed young and had built a life for herself through sheer determination. "You're distracted today," Emma observed as they peeled potatoes for dinner. "Something on your mind?" Katherine debated whether to mention Miles, then decided honesty was better than sneaking around. "I met someone yesterday, a cowboy named Miles Everett. He asked me to have dinner with him this evening." Emma's hand stilled. "Miles Everett from the Double R, yes. Do you know him?" "I know of him. His family used to own a ranch south of here, but they lost it during a bad drought. His father took his own life, and Miles's mother died not long after from grief, some say. Miles was left with nothing but debts." Emma resumed peeling, her expression thoughtful. "But he's worked hard to pay those debts off. Robert Richardson, who owns the Double R, speaks highly of him, says Miles is the best horseman he's ever seen and honest as the day is long." Katherine's heart ached at the story. Miles had known loss just as she had rebuilt himself from nothing. "He seems kind." "Kind doesn't always mean safe, Katie girl. Cowboys are wanderers by nature. Don't give your heart too quickly." But even as Katherine nodded, she knew it might already be too late for such warnings. She wore her best dress that evening, a blue calico that brought out the gray of her eyes. It was simple, with none of the fashionable bustle or elaborate trim that ladies wore in the cities, but it was clean and pressed, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw her mother's face looking back at her. The same delicate features, the same light brown hair that never stayed quite pinned the way it should, the same scattering of freckles across her nose. Miles was waiting outside the hotel when she arrived, and the way his face lit up when he saw her made her feel beautiful despite her worn dress and simple shoes. He'd cleaned up, shaved, and changed into a pressed shirt and vest, his dark hair still damp from washing. "Miss Emerson," he said, offering his arm, "you look lovely. Thank you." She took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fabric of his shirt. "You look very handsome yourself." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Jamestown, which meant it had real tablecloths and glass windows, and a menu written on a chalkboard behind the counter. It was still rough by city standards, but Katherine didn't care about elegance. She cared about the way Miles held her chair for her, the way he asked what she'd like before he ordered, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words were the most important thing in the world. They ordered roast chicken and potatoes, and as they waited for their food, Miles asked her about her art. "How long have you been drawing?" "Since I was a child. My mother was an artist before she married. She died when I was 12, but she'd already taught me to see the world differently, to notice light and shadow and the way faces tell stories." Katherine traced a finger along the edge of her water glass. "After she died, drawing became a way to keep her close. I'd sketch things I thought she would have loved, and it felt like sharing them with her." "That's beautiful," Miles said quietly. "Do you still have those drawings, some of them? We had to leave most of our possessions behind when we left Sacramento. My father was a gambler, and he died owing money to some very dangerous men. My Aunt Emma took us in, but we could only bring what we could carry on the stagecoach." Miles reached across the table and took her hand, and the gesture was so natural, so right, that Katherine didn't even think to pull away. "I'm glad you made it here safely, though I'm sorry for the circumstances that brought you." "And you?" Katherine asked, turning his hand over to trace the calluses on his palm. "Your aunt told me you've had your own share of hardship." His jaw tightened, but he didn't pull his hand away. "My father borrowed heavily to keep our ranch going during a drought. When the rains didn't come and the cattle died, he couldn't see any way out. He was a proud man, couldn't bear the shame of failure." Miles's voice was steady, but Katherine could see the old pain in his eyes. "My mother loved him desperately. When he died, it was like she couldn't figure out how to keep living. She just faded away." "How old were you?" 23, "Old enough that I should have been able to save them, but I didn't know how." Katherine squeezed his hand. "You can't blame yourself for choices they made. I know that in my head, my heart's still learning it." He looked up at her, and his smile was sad but genuine. "Working with horses helps. They live entirely in the present moment. They don't carry regret or worry about tomorrow. They just are." Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Miles told her about life on the Double R Ranch, about breaking wild mustangs and long days in the saddle under the California sun. Katherine told him about Sacramento, about the grand houses along the river where she'd sometimes been hired to paint portraits of wealthy families, about the libraries and museums she'd loved to visit. "You miss the city?" Miles asked. "Sometimes. But there's something peaceful about Jamestown, too. It's rawer, more honest. People here seem to say what they mean. That's because most of us don't have the luxury of pretense. Life's too hard out here to waste time on it." Miles leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I'll decide whether to answer." He grinned at that. "Fair enough. Why did you give me that portrait? You could have sold it, earned money you probably need." Katherine considered the question, wanting to give him an honest answer. "Because you were real. Most people who hire me want to look a certain way in their portraits. They want to appear richer or more important or more beautiful than they are. But when I was drawing you yesterday, you weren't performing for anyone. You were just yourself, genuine and unguarded. That felt like something worth giving away for free." Miles was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "No one's ever seen me quite like that before." "Then perhaps people haven't been looking closely enough." After dinner, Miles walked her back to the boarding house through streets lit by oil lamps and moonlight. The night air was cool, scented with pine from the surrounding forests, and somewhere a harmonica played a lonely tune. "May I see you again?" Miles asked as they stopped outside her aunt's front gate. I'd like that very much. I have Sunday afternoon free. There's a place I'd like to show you if you're willing to ride. I haven't been on a horse in years. I'll find you the gentlest mare at the Double R. Do you trust me?" Katherine looked into his eyes and found that, impossibly, she did. Yes. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly that it made her heart flutter. "Until Sunday, Katherine." She watched him walk away into the darkness, then floated into the house, past her aunt's knowing smile, up to her room where she lay awake for hours, reliving every moment of the evening. Sunday arrived bright and clear, the kind of perfect summer day that made even dusty Jamestown seem beautiful. Miles came for her just after noon, leading 2 horses, a tall bay gelding for himself and a pretty sorrel mare with a gentle eye for Katherine. "This is Daisy," Miles said, stroking the mare's neck. "She's the sweetest horse on the ranch. She'll take good care of you." Katherine approached slowly, letting Daisy sniff her hand before she stroked the soft nose. "Hello, Daisy. I hope you're patient with me." Miles helped her into the saddle, his hand steady on her waist, and Katherine tried to remember everything she'd learned about riding as a girl. But it came back naturally, the rhythm of the horse's gait, the feel of the reins in her hands. They rode north out of town, following a trail that climbed into the foothills. The landscape was golden with summer grass, dotted with oak trees and outcroppings of gray rock. Hawks circled overhead, and in the distance, the higher peaks of the Sierra Nevada rose against the blue sky. "Where are we going?" Katherine asked as they rode side by side. "You'll see. It's not much farther." After another 20 minutes, they crested a rise, and Katherine gasped. Below them lay a hidden valley, small and green, with a stream running through it and wildflowers blooming in every color. A single oak tree stood near the water, its branches spreading wide to create a pool of shade. "Miles, it's beautiful. I found it last year while tracking a stray calf. I come here sometimes when I need to think." He dismounted and came to help her down, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "I wanted to share it with you." They tied the horses near the stream where they could drink and graze, and Miles spread a blanket under the oak tree. He'd brought bread and cheese and apples in his saddlebag, along with a jar of lemonade wrapped in damp cloth to keep it cool. They sat in the shade, eating and talking about everything and nothing. Katherine learned that Miles had a younger sister named Sarah who'd married a shopkeeper in Sacramento and was expecting her first child in the fall. Miles learned that Katherine had always wanted to travel to Paris to see the great art museums, that she could speak a little French, that she was terrified of spiders but not of snakes. "I wish I had my drawing supplies," Katherine said, looking at the way the sunlight filtered through the oak leaves. "This place deserves to be captured. Come back next Sunday and bring them. I'll take you riding every Sunday if you're willing." "Every Sunday? Won't your employer mind?" "Robert Richardson is a good man. He gives me Sunday afternoons off, says even cowboys need a day of rest." Miles plucked a piece of grass and twisted it between his fingers. "Katherine, I know we've only just met, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life." Her breath caught. "I feel that too. It frightens me a little." "Why?" "Because I've already lost so many people I loved. My mother, my father. The idea of caring for someone else, of risking that kind of loss again, it terrifies me." Miles reached for her hand. "I can't promise I'll never leave you. Life doesn't give guarantees like that. But I can promise that for as long as I'm here, I'll choose you. Every single day, I'll choose you." Katherine looked at their joined hands, at the sincerity in his face, and felt something in her chest crack open. "Then I'll choose you too." He kissed her then, soft and sweet under the oak tree, and Katherine felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. His lips were warm, his touch gentle, and when they finally pulled apart, she was trembling. "I should probably get you back before your aunt sends out a search party," Miles said, his voice rough. "Probably," Katherine agreed, but neither of them moved for a long moment. The summer weeks that followed were the happiest Katherine had known in years. Miles came to town whenever he could, and they walked together in the evenings, talking and laughing, learning each other's stories. On Sundays, they rode to the hidden valley, and Katherine brought her drawing supplies and sketched while Miles dozed in the shade or read aloud from a book of poetry his mother had loved. She drew him constantly, filling her sketchbook with studies of his hands, his profile, the way he looked when he laughed. He kept every drawing she gave him, storing them carefully in a wooden box he'd bought for the purpose. "You're building quite a collection," Katherine teased one Sunday as he added another portrait to his box. "When I'm an old man, I'll look at these and remember the summer I fell in love with an artist," Miles said seriously. "These are proof that it was real, that you were real." "I'm not going anywhere. Promise me." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. "Miles, what's wrong?" He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Robert Richardson is expanding his operation. He's bought another ranch in Nevada near Virginia City, and he wants me to go help set it up." It would mean leaving for several months, maybe longer. Katherine felt like she'd been punched. "When?" "End of September." "Katherine, I don't want to go, but the pay is almost double what I make here. I could save enough to start thinking about my own place, my own future." "Our future if you'll wait for me." September was only 6 weeks away. Katherine tried to imagine months without seeing Miles, without their Sunday rides, without his steady presence in her life, and the thought made her throat tight. "Of course I'll wait, but I'll miss you terribly." "Come with me," she stared at him. "What? Marry me and come with me to Nevada? I know it's fast, I know we've only known each other a few months, but Katherine, I love you. I want to build a life with you, and I don't want to spend half of it apart." Katherine's heart was racing. "Miles, that's crazy. We've known each other for 2 months. People don't make decisions like this so quickly. People in love do. Tell me you don't feel the same way. Tell me this hasn't been the best summer of your life. Tell me you don't love me and I'll never mention it again." "I can't tell you that because it would be a lie." Katherine stood, pacing to the edge of the stream. "I do love you, but marriage is serious, Miles. It's forever." He came to stand behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I know it's forever. That's exactly why I'm asking." "I want forever with you." Katherine turned to face him, searching his eyes. She saw love there and hope, and a vulnerability that made her want to protect him from every hurt the world might throw his way. She thought about her aunt's warning that cowboys were wanderers, but Miles wasn't asking to wander. He was asking her to wander with him, to build something permanent together wherever they landed. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll go to Nevada with you. Yes to forever." Miles whooped and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her breathless, and Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Jamestown. Katherine wore a cream-colored dress that her aunt had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Miles had picked that morning. Her Aunt Emma stood beside her, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and Robert Richardson stood up with Miles, clapping him on the shoulder and whispering something that made Miles grin. The ceremony was short and simple, but when Miles slipped a plain gold band on her finger and promised to love her in sickness and health, in plenty and in want, for all the days of their lives, Katherine felt the words settle into her bones like truth. Afterward, they had a small celebration at the boarding house. Emma had baked her famous apple pie, and several of the townspeople brought dishes to share. Robert Richardson gave them a generous check as a wedding present, and Emma gave Katherine a set of paints and fine brushes that must have cost a month's income. "For your new life," Emma said, hugging Katherine tightly. "Promise you'll write." "Every week," Katherine promised, crying into her aunt's shoulder. "Thank you for everything, for taking me in, for giving me a home. You gave me purpose when I needed it most. Now go make your own purpose with that handsome cowboy of yours." Miles had rented a small room at the hotel for their wedding night, wanting to give Katherine a proper beginning to their marriage. As they climbed the stairs together, Katherine's nervousness must have shown on her face because Miles stopped and cupped her cheek. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We can just sleep, just talk. We have the rest of our lives, Katherine. There's no rush." But Katherine shook her head. "I'm not afraid, I'm just happy, so happy it almost hurts." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle touches, and Katherine fell asleep in Miles's arms, feeling safer than she had since her mother died. They left for Nevada a week later, traveling by stagecoach with their few possessions packed in 2 trunks. The journey took 4 days, bumping over rough roads through the mountains, stopping at way stations where the food was bad and the beds worse. But Katherine didn't care because Miles was beside her, pointing out landmarks, telling her stories about the country they passed through, making her laugh when the journey got particularly uncomfortable. Virginia City was like nothing Katherine had ever seen. Built into the side of Mount Davidson, it was a booming mining town where the Comstock lode had made some men millionaires and left thousands more chasing the dream of silver. The streets were steep and crowded, lined with saloons and theaters and shops selling everything from mining equipment to French champagne. The ranch that Robert Richardson had purchased was called the Silver Creek Ranch, located about 10 miles outside of town in a valley where water was plentiful and grass grew thick. The previous owner had died suddenly, and his widow had sold cheap, eager to return to family in the East. Miles's job was to assess the stock, hire reliable hands, and get the operation running smoothly. It was a huge responsibility, and Katherine watched him throw himself into the work with the same intensity he brought to everything he did. They lived in the ranch house, a solid 2-story building that needed repairs but had good bones. Katherine scrubbed and painted and sewed curtains while Miles worked from dawn to dark, mending fences and breaking horses and interviewing potential ranch hands. In the evenings, exhausted but content, they'd sit on the front porch and watch the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Katherine sketched constantly, filling pages with views of the ranch, with portraits of the men Miles hired, with studies of horses and cattle and the wild landscape around them. "You should sell these," Miles said one evening, looking through her latest sketches. "People in Virginia City have money to burn, and there's not much in the way of culture. You could set up a studio, take commissions." Katherine had been thinking the same thing, but she was hesitant. "I'm needed here. There's so much work to do on the ranch." "We can hire someone to help with that. Katherine, you have a gift. You should use it." So Katherine rented a small shop front in Virginia City, advertising portrait services and landscape paintings. At first, business was slow, but then the wife of a mine superintendent commissioned a portrait of her children, and she was so pleased with the result that she recommended Katherine to her friends. Within 2 months, Katherine had more work than she could handle, and she was earning almost as much as Miles. They fell into a rhythm, a partnership where they both contributed and both supported each other's dreams. Miles would ride into town on Saturdays to pick Katherine up from her studio, and they'd ride back to the ranch together, talking about their week, making plans for the future. Winter came to Nevada with a vengeance, bringing snow that piled high in the valley and temperatures that made the horses' breath steam in the morning air. Katherine worried about Miles working outside in such conditions, and she took to tucking extra sandwiches in his saddlebag, knitting him warmer socks, heating bricks to warm their bed at night. One particularly brutal evening in January, Miles came home late, covered in snow and shivering. Katherine helped him out of his frozen clothes and into a hot bath, then wrapped him in blankets by the fire with a cup of coffee laced with whiskey. "We lost 3 calves to the cold today," Miles said, staring into the fire. "I should have moved them to the lower pasture sooner. I should have seen the storm coming. You're not God, Miles. You can't control the weather. But I can make better decisions. Those calves died because I didn't plan well enough." Katherine knelt beside his chair, taking his cold hands in hers. "You're doing an incredible job here. Robert Richardson told me himself last month that the ranch is exceeding all his expectations. A few losses don't erase all your success. I just keep thinking about my father, how he lost everything because he couldn't adapt to the drought. I can't fail like he did, Katherine. I can't put you through that. Listen to me." Katherine's voice was firm. "You are not your father. You're not carrying his debts or his demons. You're your own man, and you're a good man. One hard winter doesn't define you." Miles pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her hair. "What did I do to deserve you? You asked to keep a drawing forever. Apparently, that was enough." He laughed, and some of the tension left his shoulders. They sat by the fire until the logs burned down to embers, holding each other against the cold. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the valley into something magical. Wildflowers bloomed everywhere, and the creek ran high with snowmelt. Katherine painted landscapes that she sold to wealthy mine owners who wanted reminders of Nevada's brief beauty, and Miles hired 3 new hands to help with the spring roundup. One of the new hands was a young man named Thomas Worth, barely 19, who'd come west from Ohio looking for adventure. He was clumsy at first, but eager to learn, and Miles took him under his wing, teaching him everything he knew about ranching. "You remind me of myself at that age," Miles told Thomas one evening after they'd spent a long day mending fence. "Full of dreams and not much sense." "Did you figure it out eventually? The sense part?" Thomas asked. "I'm still working on it, but I married a woman smarter than me, so that helps." Katherine, overhearing this from the kitchen where she was preparing dinner, smiled and made a mental note to sketch Thomas. He had an interesting face, all sharp angles and earnest eyes, and she thought his mother back in Ohio might appreciate a portrait. In May, Katherine realized she'd missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was stress or perhaps an irregularity brought on by the change in altitude. But when another month passed with the same result, she rode into Virginia City to see the doctor. Martha Hayes was a rarity in the West, a female physician who trained in San Francisco and come to Nevada to serve the mining communities. She was in her 40s, brisk and competent, and she examined Katherine with gentle efficiency. "Well, Mrs. Everett, congratulations. You're going to have a baby. I'd estimate you're about 3 months along, which means you can expect to deliver sometime in November." Katherine rode back to the ranch in a daze. A baby. She was going to be a mother. She and Miles were going to have a child together. The knowledge filled her with a complicated tangle of joy and terror. She waited until after dinner to tell Miles, when they were sitting on the porch in the twilight, watching bats swoop through the air catching insects. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Miles turned to her immediately, concern crossing his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think so. I hope not." Katherine took a deep breath. "Miles, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The expression on his face was worth capturing. Shock, then wonder, then pure, unbridled joy. He let out a whoop that probably scared the horses and lifted her carefully, spinning her gently before setting her down and dropping to his knees to press his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he whispered. "I'm your father, and I already love you more than I knew was possible." Katherine laughed, crying at the same time, running her fingers through his hair. "You're happy then?" He looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. Katherine, you've given me everything. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I swear I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. You already deserve me. You deserve happiness, Miles. Let yourself have it." The months of her pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation. Miles built a cradle with his own hands, carving it from oak and sanding it smooth as silk. Katherine sewed tiny gowns and blankets, and her Aunt Emma sent a package from California full of soft yarns and patterns for baby clothes. As her belly grew, Katherine had to cut back on her hours at the studio in Virginia City. But she continued painting at home, doing landscapes and still lifes that Miles would take into town to sell for her. The money they were saving was growing into a substantial sum, and they began talking seriously about buying their own ranch someday. "I want to give our child what I didn't have," Miles said one evening as they discussed their plans. "Stability, security, a place that's truly ours." "We will," Katherine promised. "We're building something good here, Miles, something lasting." In early November, Katherine's pain started just before dawn. Miles rode like mad to fetch Dr. Hayes from Virginia City, and the doctor arrived just in time to help Katherine through the final stages of labor. It was long and hard and painful, but when Katherine finally heard her baby's first cry, every moment of suffering was worth it. Dr. Hayes placed a squirming, red-faced infant in her arms and announced, "You have a son, Mrs. Everett. A big, healthy boy." Katherine looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect fingers and the dark fuzz of hair on his head, and felt her heart expand to a size she hadn't known was possible. Miles was crying openly as he gazed at his son, tracing a gentle finger down the baby's cheek. "He's perfect," Miles whispered. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names for months but never quite decided. Now, looking at her son, Katherine knew. "William, after your father." "William Miles Everett." Miles's throat worked. "Are you sure? After everything? Your father made mistakes, but he loved you. He deserves to be remembered for that love." Katherine placed the baby in Miles's arms, watching her strong cowboy husband cradle their son with infinite gentleness. "And maybe this William will have a different story, a happier one. With you as his mother, how could he not? Those first weeks with William were exhausting and wonderful. He was a good baby for the most part, but he wanted to eat constantly, and Katherine walked around in a haze of sleeplessness and joy. Miles helped whenever he could, walking William around the house in the middle of the night, singing him old trail songs in his rough voice until the baby quieted. Emma came to visit in December, making the long journey from California to meet her great-nephew. She stayed for 2 weeks, helping with the cooking and cleaning and giving Katherine and Miles time to rest. "You've built something beautiful here," Emma told Katherine on her last evening before returning to California. "Not just the ranch, but your family. Your mother would be so proud of you. I wish she could have met William. She knows him in whatever way the dead know the living. And she knows you're happy. That's what every mother wants for her child." After Emma left, the winter settled in hard. It was even colder than the previous year, with snow that lasted for weeks at a time. But inside the ranch house, there was warmth and light and laughter. William grew rapidly. his dark eyes focusing on their faces, his tiny mouth learning to smile. Katherine sketched him constantly, trying to capture every stage of his development. She filled an entire sketchbook just with drawings of William sleeping, eating, being held by his father. These weren't for sale or commission. These were for them, a record of these precious days. One evening in late February, Miles came home with news. Robert Richardson wants to sell us the Silver Creek Ranch. He's decided to consolidate his operations back in California, and he's offering us a very fair price. We could own this place, Katherine. It could really be ours. Katherine looked around the house they'd made into a home, at the cradle where William slept, at the life they'd built in this valley. We have enough saved, almost. We'd need to take out a small loan, but yes, we could do this. Then let's do it. Let's put down roots here. By spring of 1880, they were the official owners of the Silver Creek Ranch. Miles hired 2 permanent hands, Thomas Worth among them, and they began to expand the operation, buying more cattle and breeding stock. Katherine reopened her studio in Virginia City on a part-time basis, bringing William with her and setting up a small nursery in the back room. The mining town's wealthy families loved having an artist of Katherine's skill available, and she did a brisk business in portraits and commissioned paintings. One of her landscapes even sold to a San Francisco art dealer who saw it in a Virginia City hotel and tracked her down to buy it. "You're becoming famous," Miles teased when she told him about the sale. "Hardly, but I'm becoming successful, which is almost as good." William grew into a curious, energetic toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. He loved the horses and would squeal with delight when Miles lifted him onto the gentle mare Daisy for short rides around the paddock. Katherine sketched these moments, capturing the joy on both their faces. In the summer of 1881, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she felt more prepared, more confident in her ability to handle motherhood. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and in March of 1882, she delivered a daughter they named Clara, after Miles's mother. Clara was the opposite of William in temperament, a quiet, watchful baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world around her. Katherine would often find Miles sitting with Clara in his arms, talking to her about anything and everything, his voice soft and full of wonder. "I can't believe I have a daughter," he said one evening as Katherine sketched them together. "I keep thinking about all the things I want to teach her, all the ways I want to protect her." "We'll protect her together," Katherine said. "And we'll teach her to be strong so she can protect herself too." The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered under Miles's careful management, and Katherine's reputation as an artist grew. They added onto the house, building more bedrooms and a proper studio for Katherine where she could paint with good northern light. William and Clara grew up running wild on the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores as soon as they were able. William was bold and adventurous, always getting into scrapes, while Clara was thoughtful and artistic, showing signs of inheriting her mother's talent. In 1885, when William was 6 and Clara was 3, Katherine found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder, perhaps because she was older now, 31 instead of 23. She tired easily and spent the last months mostly resting, letting Miles and their hired help handle more of the work. Their third child, a son they named Robert after Robert Richardson, who had given them their start, was born in November. He was a big baby, nearly 10 pounds, and the delivery was difficult. Dr. Hayes warned Katherine that she should probably not have more children, that another pregnancy could be dangerous. Katherine and Miles agreed that 3 children were blessing enough. They had their family, their ranch, their life together. It was more than either of them had dared to dream of that day in Jamestown when Katherine had sketched a lonely cowboy across the street. As the children grew, Katherine began teaching them art. Clara showed real promise, with an eye for color and composition that reminded Katherine of her own mother. William was less interested in drawing but loved hearing the stories behind Katherine's paintings, and young Robert seemed to have inherited his father's way with animals, preferring to be in the barn rather than the studio. Miles taught all three children to ride and rope, to mend fence and read the weather. He was a patient teacher, never raising his voice, always encouraging them to try again when they failed. Katherine would watch him with the children and feel overwhelmed with love for this man, who had asked to keep her drawing forever, and had instead kept her heart. In the summer of 1890, when William was 11, Clara 8, and Robert 5, they received word that Robert Richardson had died in California. Miles traveled to Jamestown for the funeral, taking William with him to pay their respects to the man who had changed their lives. When they returned, Miles was quiet and thoughtful. That evening, after the children were in bed, he took Katherine's hand and led her out to the porch where they'd spent so many evenings together. "Being back in Jamestown made me think about how far we've come," Miles said. 13 years ago, I was just a ranch hand with nothing but debts and grief. Now I have you, our children, this ranch. I have a life I'm proud of. We built it together, Katherine reminded him. I know, but it started with you seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself. That drawing you made, the one I asked to keep forever, I still have it. Sometimes I look at it and remember the man I was then, and I'm amazed at how much you've changed me. Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder. You changed me too. You taught me it was safe to love again, to build something permanent. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. Do you ever regret marrying me so quickly, taking such a risk on a cowboy you barely knew? Never. Not for a single moment. Katherine lifted her head to look at him in the moonlight. You're the best decision I ever made, Miles Everett. He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and Katherine thought about all the kisses they'd shared over the years, in joy and sorrow, in passion and comfort. Each one a promise kept, a choice reaffirmed. The years continued to pass. William grew tall and strong, working alongside his father on the ranch and showing a natural talent for business that made Miles proud. Clara developed into a serious artist, and when she was 16, Katherine arranged for her to study with a painter in San Francisco for a summer. Robert proved to be a gifted horseman, and by the time he was 12, he was breaking young horses as skillfully as his father. In 1895, Emma Whitfield passed away peacefully in her sleep in Jamestown. Katherine and Miles traveled to California for the funeral, bringing all three children. It was a bittersweet trip, saying goodbye to the woman who had taken Katherine in when she had nowhere else to go, but also seeing how much Jamestown had grown and changed. They visited the spot where Katherine had first sketched Miles, where he'd crossed the street to ask about the portrait. The general store was still there, though under new ownership, and the bench where Katherine had sat was long gone, but the memory was as vivid as ever. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been too shy to approach you that day, Miles said as they stood together on the dusty street. Then I probably would have crossed the street to give you the drawing anyway. We were meant to find each other, Miles. I've always believed that. In 1898, William announced that he was in love. The girl was named Margaret, the daughter of a Virginia city banker, and she was sweet and sensible and made William light up like sunshine. They were married that fall, and Miles and Katherine became in-laws, watching their eldest son start his own family. Clara decided against marriage, at least for the time being. She was focused on her art, and at 21, she had her first exhibition in a San Francisco gallery. Katherine and Miles traveled to the city for the opening, and Katherine cried with pride as she watched well-dressed patrons admire her daughter's paintings. "You did this," Miles whispered in her ear. "You gave her this gift." "We gave it to her," Katherine corrected. "Together." Robert, at 18, was still deciding what he wanted from life. He loved the ranch but was also curious about the world beyond Nevada. Miles encouraged him to travel if he wanted, to see something of the country before settling down. "I didn't get to see much before I had responsibilities," Miles told his youngest son. "But you have time. Use it wisely." In the winter of 1900, Miles turned 47. He'd been working to repair a fence in the cold when he came home complaining of pain in his chest. Katherine wanted to send for the doctor, but Miles insisted it was just a pulled muscle, that he'd be fine after a good night's rest. But that night, Katherine woke to find Miles gasping for air, his face gray with pain. She screamed for Robert, who rode for Dr. Hayes while Katherine held Miles, praying harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. Dr. Hayes arrived quickly, examined Miles, and gave him medicine for his heart. "It was a warning," she told Katherine and the anxious children gathered in the bedroom. "Not a full heart attack, but close. He needs complete rest for at least 2 months, and even then, he can't go back to the kind of physical labor he's been doing." Miles chafed at the restrictions, but Katherine was firm. "We didn't build this life together just so you could work yourself to death. Robert and the hands can manage the ranch work. You need to rest and recover." During his recovery, Miles was forced to slow down for the first time in decades. He sat on the porch in the winter sunshine, wrapped in blankets, and watched the ranch operate without his constant involvement. It was difficult for him at first, but gradually, he began to appreciate the forced stillness. Katherine sketched him during those weeks, capturing the new lines on his face, the silver that had crept into his dark hair. He was still handsome to her, still the cowboy she'd fallen in love with, but seasoned now by time and experience. "I'm getting old," Miles said one afternoon, watching her work. "We both are. That's what happens when you're lucky enough to live a long life together. Are you still glad you married me, even now that I'm broken down and useless?" Katherine set down her charcoal and came to kneel beside his chair. "You are neither broken nor useless. You're the father of my children, the builder of our family's success, the love of my life. A few weeks of rest doesn't change any of that. I wanted to grow old with you, but I didn't think about what growing old would actually mean, that my body would betray me, that I couldn't do the work I love anymore. Then we'll find new work for you to love. You can manage the business side of the ranch, handle the books and the buying and selling. You can teach Robert everything you know so he can take over when the time comes. Growing old doesn't mean becoming useless. It means gaining wisdom." Miles recovered slowly but steadily. He did step back from the physical labor, letting Robert and the ranch hands handle the hard work while he focused on management. To his surprise, he discovered he had a talent for the business aspects he'd always considered secondary. Under his financial management, the ranch became even more profitable. In 1902, William and Margaret gave Miles and Katherine their first grandchild, a boy they named Miles. Katherine cried when she held her grandson for the first time, overwhelmed by the continuation of their legacy, the ripple of their love extending into another generation. Clara, at 25, finally fell in love with a fellow artist she met at an exhibition in San Francisco. His name was David Chen, the son of Chinese immigrants, and he painted beautiful watercolors of Chinatown and the Bay. Their courtship scandalized some of Virginia City's more conservative residents, But Miles and Katherine welcomed David warmly, seeing in him the same artistic passion that drove their daughter. "All I've ever wanted is for our children to find the kind of love we found," Miles told Clara when she nervously brought David to meet them. "If you're happy, then we're happy." They were married in a small ceremony at the ranch in 1903, and Katherine painted a portrait of the newlyweds as a wedding gift. It was some of her finest work, capturing not just their physical features but the joy and hope in their faces as they looked at each other. Robert, now 21, announced that he wanted to try breeding horses specifically, focusing on strong, working stock suited to ranch life. Miles encouraged the venture, and they set aside part of the ranch for Robert's breeding program. Within a few years, the Silver Creek horses became known throughout Nevada for their quality and temperament. The years from 1905 to 1910 were peaceful and productive. The ranch continued to thrive. The children all found their paths, and Miles and Katherine settled into a comfortable rhythm. They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1908 with all their children and growing collection of grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a big party. Thomas Worth, who still worked for them after all these years, now as ranch foreman, gave a toast. "I came to this ranch as a green kid who didn't know one end of a cow from the other. Miles and Katherine took me in, taught me, made me part of this family. They've shown all of us what it means to build something lasting, to love faithfully, to work hard and dream big. Here's to 30 more years." Everyone raised their glasses, and Katherine looked at Miles across the crowded room. He was 55 now, his hair more silver than dark, his face lined with years of sun and wind and laughter. He was still the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. That night, alone in their bedroom, Miles gave Katherine a gift. It was a wooden box carved and polished to a soft sheen, and when she opened it, she found every drawing she'd ever given him, carefully preserved and organized. "30 years of seeing myself through your eyes," Miles said softly. "30 years of being loved by you. These drawings are my most precious possession, Katherine. They're proof that you saw something worth capturing, worth keeping. You saved me that day in Jamestown, even though I didn't know I needed saving." Katherine touched the first drawing, the portrait she'd done of him leaning against the general store post. "You saved me too. I was so lost, so afraid. You taught me it was safe to hope again." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion of souls who'd chosen each other every day for 3 decades. Afterward, Katherine lay in Miles's arms and thought about how lucky they'd been, how many people searched their whole lives for what they'd found in a single afternoon. In 1911, Miles's heart gave him another warning. This one was more serious and Dr. Hayes, now in her 70s herself and considering retirement, was blunt. "Your heart is wearing out, Miles. That's the truth of it. You need to take things as easy as possible. No stress, no excitement, plenty of rest." Miles accepted the diagnosis with the same quiet strength he brought to everything. He officially turned over the ranch operations to Robert and William, though he still liked to sit on the porch and watch the work, offering advice when asked. Katherine reduced her painting commissions to focus on being with Miles. They spent long afternoons together, reading, talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. She sketched him still, wanting to capture every moment they had left. "You ever regret not going to Paris?" Miles asked one day. "You used to talk about seeing the museums there. I saw something better. I saw a life unfold. Our life, our children, our grandchildren. No museum could match that." In the spring of 1912, Miles woke Katherine in the middle of the night. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice urgent. "What is it? Are you in pain? Should I send for the doctor?" No, just listen. I need you to know that every single day I spent with you was a gift. Even the hard days, even the sad days. You made my life worth living, Katherine. You gave me everything. Miles, you're scaring me. Don't be scared. I'm not afraid. How can I be afraid when I've loved you and been loved by you? He took her hand, pressing it against his chest where she could feel his heart beating unevenly. If my heart stops tomorrow or 20 years from now, I'll go knowing I lived well. I loved well. That's more than most men can say. Please don't leave me, Katherine whispered. I'll stay as long as I can. I promise. Miles kept that promise for another 2 years. They were good years, quiet and full of small joys. More grandchildren were born. The ranch continued to prosper under William and Robert's joint management. Clara had an exhibition in New York that received favorable reviews. Life went on, and Miles was part of it all, the steady center around which the family orbited. In August of 1914, Miles died peacefully in his sleep with Katherine beside him. He was 61 years old. They'd been married for 36 years. The funeral was held at the ranch, and people came from all over Nevada and California to pay their respects. Cowboys Miles had trained, artists Katherine had taught, business associates, friends, family. The list of people whose lives Miles had touched was staggering. Katherine stood beside his grave and thought about the young cowboy who'd crossed a dusty street to ask about a drawing, who'd asked to keep it forever. He'd kept so much more than that. He'd kept her heart, her trust, her love, and she had kept his. In the months after Miles's death, Katherine struggled. The house felt empty without him, the ranch too quiet. Her children urged her to move in with one of them, but she refused. This was her home, the place she'd built with Miles, and she wasn't ready to leave it. Instead, she threw herself into painting. She created a series of works chronicling their life together, paintings based on her decades of sketches. The cowboy leaning against the post in Jamestown, their hidden valley with the oak tree, Miles holding baby William, the ranch in every season. Their children growing up, Miles in old age, silver-haired and wise. When the series was complete, she held an exhibition in Virginia City. It was the most personal work she'd ever done, and she wasn't sure anyone would want to see it. But the opening was packed, and people stood in front of the paintings with tears streaming down their faces. "You've captured something universal," Clara told her mother. "Not just your love story, but what it means to build a life with someone, to choose each other every day." The exhibition traveled to San Francisco and then to Denver, and Katherine's work gained recognition she'd never sought. But she didn't paint for fame. She painted to keep Miles alive, to honor what they'd built together. Katherine lived another 12 years after Miles died. Years she filled with painting and grandchildren, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. She watched William's children grow up, attended Clara's exhibitions, celebrated when Robert's breeding program produced a horse that won awards across the West. She never remarried, never even considered it. She'd had her great love, and it had been enough to last a lifetime. In the spring of 1926, at the age of 73, Katherine caught pneumonia. She'd been painting outside, trying to capture the wildflowers in the meadow, and stayed out too long in the cool air. By the time her children realized how sick she was, it was too late for medicine to help much. As she lay in the bed she'd shared with Miles for so many years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Katherine felt at peace. She'd lived a full life, loved deeply, created beauty, raised good people. "What more could anyone ask? Tell us about the drawing," her youngest grandson asked. He was 12, Miles's great-grandson, with the same amber eyes. Katherine smiled, remembering. "I was sitting on a bench in Jamestown, sketching a cowboy across the street. He was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, though he didn't know it. When I finished, he crossed the street and asked if he could keep the drawing forever. And did he? Yes. He kept it until the day he died, and he kept me too, and I kept him. That's what love is, sweet boy. It's choosing to keep someone, to treasure them, to see them clearly and love them anyway. That night, Katherine died peacefully with her children around her, slipping away with Miles's name on her lips. They buried her beside Miles on the ranch, under the wide Nevada sky they'd both loved. On her headstone, next to the dates of her birth and death, Robert had engraved a simple line. She saw beauty everywhere, especially in him. The ranch stayed in the family for generations. The drawings and paintings Katherine created became treasured heirlooms, passed down along with the stories of the cowboy and the artist who'd found each other across a dusty street in Jamestown and built a love that lasted beyond death. And somewhere in whatever comes after, Miles and Katherine found each other again, still choosing each other, still keeping each other, forever and always, just as they'd promised on that perfect summer day so long ago when a simple drawing became the beginning of everything that mattered.